this short talk about the graveyard and old church at Urney in the townland of Dungooly. This is close to the northmost point in County Louth. I'm Seamus Ballew from the County Louth Archaeological Historical Society. So here's a map that shows the location of the graveyard, and you can see the northmost point of the county is there, so we're close to here. The graveyard can be approached from the south along the R177. It's the main Dundalk Armagh Road, and this section of it here is in the parish of Kilcury. Bottom of the map is the Castleblaney Road from Dundalk. This sign was erected at the entrance of the graveyard, and part of it says that Urney is the ancient church from the Irish Urney, meaning prayer. It was said to have been founded by St. Patrick, whose name tradition says it bore. The chapel was used as a place of worship for the local populace in penal times. In 1769, the Gaelic poet Padre Urney was interred within the graveyard. So this roadway or lane to the graveyard is known as Corpse Road. In 1969, local landowners, Owen Casey, Brian Rocks and Bernard O'Hanlon, gave strips of land to improve the access and to create a lay-by. So here is a view of the graveyard from the lane. Only one or two burials have taken place in the past 50 years. This is the gateway at the end of the lane from where the graveyard is accessed. We've now reached the gate leading into the graveyard. The graveyard is maintained by a few of the local people who've been committed since 1969. This is the ruins of the chapel. Urney doesn't seem to have been a parish church, rather it was a chapel, and tradition attributes the first chapel to be dedicated to St. Patrick. Here is a general view of the gravestones. Some of them are markers that don't have inscriptions. The earliest inscriptions date to the 1700s. Urney, as we said, means a place of prayer, or it could be interpreted as the location of an oratory. Dungooly was in the list of places that paid tithes to the priory of St. Mary at Louth village. At the suppression of the monasteries in 1539, the tithes were released to a gentleman named O'Roddy. This booklet was published by the Society in 1969 by Canon Diarmaid MacIver to coincide with the bicentennial of the death of Padre Urney. The graveyard was overgrown, and a local man told me that at that stage they found some skulls and bones near the ditches, but there was a big clean-up carried on. Father MacIver also organised a similar clean-up at Cain Graveyard near Killeen in Dublin. So we'll take a look at some of the gravestones. This gravestone here has the IHS monogram, and it's within a sunburst. The IHS comes from the Greek word for Jesus. The first three Greek letters are iota, eta and sigma, and capitalised they look like an IH and a sigma sign that you might be familiar with from school. And then Latinised, that becomes IHS. So hence we've got the IHS monogram with a cross above it. And this was popularised by St. Bernardine of Siena. So again, as we said, this gravestone is to the McKenna family, and here lies the body of Matthew McKenna, who died in 1795, aged 21 years. Also the body of his mother Rose O'Hanlon, and she died in 1795. Here is another view of the church. This church was replaced in 1794 with the new church at Kilcury, and that was dedicated to St. Patrick. During the penal 18th century, Urney was a place of worship for all those in the neighbouring area. Here is the McCann gravestone, and here lies the body of Brian McCann, who departed this life in May the 12th, and also his son Peter, who died the 23rd of the same month, I think, aged 26 years, and it's dated at 1790. Here on the left, as you look, you can see a hand. So that's an enlargement there of the hand symbol that you can see there on the gravestone, and we'll see the hand appears on another gravestone later on. This coffin lid tomb is to the Quinn family. Michael Quinn died in 1883, and the inscription runs along the edges of the monument. Michael Quinn, as we said, died in 1883, aged 42. Also, Owen Quinn died 1878, and John in 1876. And you can see the person, the people that made it, and it was Gilman in Sheffield. This is the Parkland Gravestone, and it's near the gateway as you enter the grave. Of interest are the cherubs' heads, and again we have the IHS monogram, and it's within the figure that resembles a monstrance. This gravestone here, it bears similarities to those designed by Patrick Corrigan that date a little later from this one. Here we see the gravestone was erected in memory of the grandfather of Francis McParland, James McParland of Shanroe, and he died in 1789. Also, his father died in 1820. This gravestone, it's similar in style, so that's why I included here, but it's within St. Bridget's Church at Kilcury, and it's got a Latin in eternal rest. It translates as, and it's to Reverend Bernard Kieran, who died in 1817, aged 73, and this is within the church. This is a simple gravestone here, and it remembers Liam O'Brien of Dungooley, and he died in March 1963, aged 67. And there's some more writing there, but it's hard to make it out. We'll see some other similar gravestones in this style here, and they were erected after 1969 by the looks of it, to commemorate the 200th anniversary of 1798. But more of that again. This is the Hollywood gravestone, erected by Lawrence Hollywood of Carriff in memory of his wife Margaret Kieran, who died in 1793. Now here we are, we've got the Commemorative Stone commemorating the 200th anniversary of the 1798 Rising. So that's the way you see it on the graveyard, but I just turned it upside down so that you could read this bit here, and it says Mehev 1998, and so that's to commemorate, and then in brackets you see the commemoration of 200th anniversary of 1798. This is the Tierney gravestone to John Tierney, who died in 1788. And again, you see we have one of these gravestones of this style here. This gravestone, or this monument, was erected to Thomas Lappin of Carriff, and he died in 1798. He was a blacksmith and a pipe maker, and he was hanged for his involvement in 1798. So this monument was obviously erected somewhere around 1998. This is the Rafferty Gravestone, erected by Michael Rafferty of Shane in memory of his father Cornelius Rafferty, who died in 1866. Also his grandfather and his grandmother, and some of his sisters who died in infancy. And again, this is another Hollywood gravestone in loving memory of Terence Hollywood, Carriff. He died in May 1889. It's hard to make out the writing there, but that's what it says. And again, another of the 1998, commemorating the 200 years of 1798, and it's Oscuelga, and it seems to commemorate people or the parishioners of Carriff. Now, here we have the Garland Gravestone. It was erected by Mrs. Culhan in Dundalk in memory of her mother and father Bridget and Thomas Garland of Dungooley, and also her husband John Culhan. He was from Kerry, and of her brother Francis Garland, and he died in 1949. Now, Mrs. Culhan, who herself was Garland, was married to Patrick Culhan, as we said. He was from Kerry, and they lived in Dundalk. And she was the mother of Patrick Culhan, who died in September 1920. And he had been a member of the IRA. And this little plaque here that was erected recently details his involvement in the 1st Battalion of the Louth Brigade of the IRA. He died in 1920 at the Mater Hospital in Dublin, and his remains were conveyed to Dundalk, and they were met outside the town by a large contingent of Dundalk volunteers and so on. And the funeral took place to Urney Cemetery. And as a good number of you would know, Culhan Street is named after him. Culhan Street is in Dundalk. So here's the Shields gravestone, and it says here lies the body of Philip Shields of Dungooley, and he died in 1781, aged 17 years of age. Descended from the Shields family is Blessed Solanus Casey, 1870 to 1957. He was a Capuchin who lived in the United States. Also buried here is Cornelius Casey, who died in 2009. With Cornelius, the Caseys, Cornelius, that's a local family, and they're not related to the Caseys of Blessed Solanus. Blessed Solanus Caseys came from Castleblaney. So it's to the Shields that Blessed Solanus is connected with the Dungooley area. So a modern notice tells us that Solanus Casey was beatified in Detroit in 2017. His grandmother was Bridget Shields from Dungooley, and local family members travelled to Detroit for the beatification. And you can see there that Blessed Solanus died on the 31st of July 1957, and he was beatified November 18th, 2017. His mother was Ellen Murphy from Mullaban, County Armagh. His father was Bernard Casey from Castleblaney. His grandmother, as we said, Bridget Shields, born 1807, Dungooley, County Louth, and his grandfather John Murphy was from Canlock, County Armagh. So all his ancestors are from the local area. Here is the Muckean gravestone. It remembers Henry Muckean, who died in 1834, and his wife Elizabeth in 1839. This is the Murphy Monument. It's to John Murphy of Dungooley, remember his wife Anne Murphy, who died in 1838. You can see the chirp heads, and it's got the Latin Glorious in Excelsis Deo. You can see the gate there behind, and that's the McParland Monument that we mentioned earlier on. Here is the McGeough gravestone in memory of Patrick McGeough, and he died of Carriff, and he died in 1865. Now, this is an important gravestone. It's quite old. It was recorded by Jack Clark in 1965. It's a Fegan gravestone, and the date up here is 1792. And reading the inscription, the gravestone was erected in memory of Neil Fegan of Carriff, and he died the 12th of March in the year of our Lord 1786, aged 60 years. And then the inscription starts to disintegrate a wee bit after that. Again, you can see the IHS monogram, as we mentioned, and the figure of Christ is underneath there. And there's a maxim there, and it says Memento Moria. And we could view this. This is also called the Corona Radiata, representing the sun, linking it in with God. Flanking the main inscription is on the left St. Michael, and there is his scale, the sense of justice at the end of a person's life, and with St. Patrick with his cross slab, and there are some other details along here that we look at now in a moment. And you see here it says by the hand of John Fegan, and there's two angels there as well. Now this is kind of slate, and it's just lying against a pillar now. So hopefully it will remain in a safe condition. So here's some more detail. So that's the hand there, and it was erected by John Fegan, by his hand, as it were. Whether he made the stone or not, we're not too sure. There's one of the angels there as well. The angels were adoring at the throne of Christ, or of God, I suppose. This is St. Michael with his scale, and on the other side was St. Patrick with his cross staff. And then the detail down the side, you have the heart shape, you have the hand again. Remember in an earlier gravestone, the hand, and you have the cross and skull. You have the skull and crossbones. Here's the Smith gravestone. It's close to a tree, so it's hard to make out the detail. It's got the IHS and the Latin Gloria in Excelsis Deo. But the interesting thing in the context of this graveyard is that it's got an hourglass on each side. So there's a kind of zoom in on the hourglass, and there's another hourglass there as well. This is the Bennett gravestone, and it's got the IHS, but sometimes the I looked like an old J, so that looks like JHS. And here lies the body John Bennett Late of Ballyard, who died in 1787, and his wife Mary a few years before that. This is Thomas Smith of Shane, 1873 to 1927, RIP. Here is a view from the end of the laneway, just before you go to the graveyard, of the house that was built by the late Eddie Haughey. It was demolished last year, and the smaller, newer dwelling has now been built by the new owner. So here's the Bicentenary Monument that was erected to the poet Peadar Urney, who died in 1769. So it was really the bicentenary of the poet's death that motivated the clean-up of the grave. So on the north board, as we enter the graveyard that we saw earlier on, so part of this details that Peadar Urney was born nearby at Rechgay, approximately 1685, and he was one of the major Gaelic poets of the 18th century in South Armagh. He was a close friend and rapparee. He was a close friend of the poet and rapparee Seamus MacMurphy. As a young man, he travelled through Munster and Connaught, learning the trade of the bard, as well as classical Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. His poetry brought him into contention with Johnson of the Fuse, the heretic head cutter, and it was a satirical poem of this name that tradition says led to the death of his friend MacMurphy. Reading on, Peadar Urney ended his days as schoolmaster in Parkland. The school children found Urney dead in his chair after a lengthy playtime. His graveyard elegy was given by Art McCooey, and again, as a reminder, that was 1769. Here are two grave markers. One simply carries a cross, and the other one doesn't apparently have any inscription or design on it. Next, we have an early Christian cross inscribed stone. The photo on the left was part of Jack Clark's 1964 article, and it's approximately a metre in height. Clark says these are generally ascribed to the early Christian period, and this is a recent photograph of the same early Christian stone. Next, we have what Clark calls a bull-on stone, and it's situated in close proximity to the ruins of the church, and now it's just inside the gate. It may have been used as a holy water stoup or as a baptismal font, but as we'll see later on, this could in actual fact be the baptismal font, because the holy water stoup is elsewhere at the moment. Urney, as we said, doesn't seem to have been a parish church, but only a chapel. It was an ancient foundation, so this is taken from the booklet that was published by Canon MacIver. Tradition ascribes it to St. Patrick, and his is the name it bore. When it was replaced in 1794 with the new church at Kilcury, this was also put under his patronage. And it was only when the present church at Kilcury was opened in 1900 that Patrick gave way to Bridget of Fahard. So now the parish church at Kilcury, which is the parish of Fahard, it's St. Bridget's Church. But up to then, the church was always dedicated to St. Patrick to 1900. But now it's St. Bridget, as we said. In this slide, we actually go to Lisbon to see part of the head of St. Bridget, and it's contained in a reliquary there. So we'll talk about that now in a moment. So just to make a note that the part of the head of St. Bridget is now in a reliquary in one of the churches in Lisbon. Here is the altar at St. Bridget's Church in Kilcury, and part of the relic of the saint is now kept here in the base of the altar. In relation to some of the history of St. Bridget died in Kildare about 524 AD, and her remains were transposed or translated to Downpatrick in the year 878, and she was buried near the grave of St. Patrick. During the Viking period, the remains were hidden, but in 1185 they were rediscovered by the Bishop of Down, and they were transferred to the Church of St. Patrick. In 1537, Henry VIII came on the scene, and the relics ended up largely being destroyed. However, before this, the head was transferred to Austria, and in turn passed on to the Spanish ambassador, who in turn gave it to the Jesuit monastery in Portugal in 1587. The relic was enshrined in the church of St. Roch in Lisbon in 1588. So to this day, the relic can be seen in Lisbon. Where we go next? Sister Mary McAllister from Fahard acquired a portion of the head, and it was authenticated by Cardinal Joseph of Lisbon in 1907, and it was enshrined under the altar in the Church of St. Bridget at Kilcury. So that's just a wee bit about St. Bridget. Canon MacIver, as we mentioned earlier on, he organised clean-up at the graveyard in Urney, and this is his gravestone that's at Kilcury, and there's a closer view of his headstone in memory of Canon Diarmaid MacIver, parish priest of Fahard, or Fahard Bridge, and he was parish priest from 1960 to 1981, and he died the 13th of July 1983. Canon MacIver was the secretary of the Society from 1940 to 1965. He was the editor of the Society's journal from 1965 to 1976, and he was president of the Society from 1968 to 1976. Canon MacIver was succeeded as editor by Noel Ross, and as most of you will know, Noel died on the 28th of July 2021 after a short illness in hospital in Drogheda. Noel became secretary of the Society in 1967, and he was secretary until the year 2000. He was editor from 1977 to this year, and he edited 45 journals. There will be many tributes paid to Noel in the coming year. I would just like to say that he was an inspirational figure. I learned a lot from him, and even though we were of different generations, I regarded him as a friend. Returning to the theme of our video, Urney, and staying in Kilcury, you see the font here is displayed at Kilcury Graveyard, and this font originally came from Urney Chapel, 1600 to 1700, and it was erected on this slide plinth in loving memory of Robert Mackay, Lurgan Keel. He died the 14th of May 1988, aged 12 years and 9 months. May he rest in peace. And still staying in Kilcury, even though it's not necessarily Urney related, this here is a mass rock, and there's a little plaque here that details the mass rock. This rock was found at Sportsman Hill in 1988. It was used for the celebration of Mass in the penal days during the 18th century. It was erected here in April 1989 and it was unearthed by Ronald Roslin. So that brings us nearly to the end of our video. So we finally return to Urney in the townland of Dungooly. The tradition says dates back to St. Patrick. It has always been near a border. In St. Patrick's time, the territory of the Conde Merhevna that kind of took in the area around Dundalk and right up to Dungooly. It met the territory of Irila. In Norman times, the English Pale extended past Roche Castle, and then we were into the territory of the Irish. The border is simply a stream to the north of the graveyard. Canon MacIver, in the little publication, notes that Urney was a suitable place for parley between the two sides. The Primate Octavian, 1478 to 1513, records meetings between himself and O'Neill, who seems to have had a castle at Dungooly. In the background is what the locals call Shane Hill. We hope you have enjoyed this video. You are welcome to access further videos through the Society's website www.clahs.ie. Agus an amseo a rís go dé sibh slán agus gur maithagibh.